Mark MacEachern and Jeffrey Cordell are our next presenters. Mark is Liaison Services Librarian in the Taubman Health Sciences Library at the University of Michigan. As a liaison, he works closely with students and faculty in several units throughout the University of Michigan health system and is heavily involved in medical, dental, and pharmacy education. He has a BA in English from McMaster University and received his MLIS from the University of Western Ontario. Jeffrey is instructional pedagogy librarian in the Shapiro Undergraduate Library at the University of Michigan. He has taught at the University of Virginia, Boston University, and Harvard, and holds a PhD in English literature and an MA in medieval studies, both from the University of Virginia. Mark and Jeffrey.
Thanks, Andrea. Hello, everyone. I'm Mark, and that's Jeff. So we're going to be talking about how the University Library at the University of Michigan has attempted to engage library instructors with assessment. Actually, before I begin, I would like to say, for the record, that this has been a great event so far. I'm excited. I'm sure I can speak on behalf of Jeff here, that we're excited to be here to talk about some of the work we've been doing. And it's been even greater to sit in the audience and listen to many of the projects you guys have been working on as well. So kudos and thanks to the University of Chicago people here who've put this together and made the day happen. But before I go through this slide, I do want to emphasize, so the subtitle of this talk was a case study from the University of Michigan's Instructor College. And Instructor College, I'll describe that in a couple minutes. And basically that's like a collective of instruction librarians at the University of Michigan Library. But really what Jeff and I are talking about today involves many more people than just him and I. We're just kind of the two people who are here talking to you about this work, all these efforts that have led to what we're talking about. So this is really a collaborative effort. Oh, left one. Okay, so we've broken the talk into two main sections. I'm going to talk first about basically give you some of the basically a description of some of the stuff we've been doing at the University of Michigan. Provide you with like in terms of instruction and instruction assessment, I'll give you kind of like an institutional background, some context, and then give you some examples, specific examples of what we've been doing. And then Jeff will take over and give a description of some of the evaluation forms his group has put together that instructors can use in their sessions, and he'll discuss the data that instructors can take from these forms, and then how they can use that to improve their teaching. So I mentioned like a minute ago, I guess, that a lot of people were involved in this process, and here's my proof. At the University of Michigan, there are, in the library, there are a number of committees that are basically, primarily focused on instruction. And the two that are most relevant for this particular talk are the Instructor College Steering Committee, which I'm a member of, and then the Assessment Committee, which Jeff is a member of. But in addition to these committees, there are, at the bottom of the slide here, you can see a series of other committees related to different aspects of instruction. And then not on this slide, but also very relevant, is kind of the if you consider this like an umbrella here, the people at the top, there's an instruction steering committee, I think they're called, that kind of makes sure communication cuts across all of these committees and make sure that we all have the same endpoint in mind, that we're all striving to do the same sorts of things and end in the same place. But of these two committees that I've highlighted in the middle, the Instructor College is the one that really connects with the majority of instructors in the library system, and much of and this is through its programming, and I'll describe it in a second, through its programming and outreach efforts. And so much of the work that the assessment committee has done in relation to instruction assessment has reached the ears or the brains of the library instructors through the Instructor College programming. So I'm just going to spend 1 minute here or two to talk about what Instructor College is. So first and foremost, Instructor College is a staff development initiative of the University Library. It's formed, I think, in 2001, and it's been going strong ever since. Its main purpose, the reason it exists, is to strengthen the instructional skills of the library staff who are involved in instruction. To do this, every year, Instructor College Steering Committee puts together an instruction program, so to speak, of workshops and brown bag sessions, et cetera, that library staff are welcome to attend, and hopefully by attending they can get some valuable information to help their teaching. And these sessions, this program can range from really abstract kind of topics on teaching strategies, such as in terms of assessment. Why would I want to assess my students, so the people I'm teaching? How do I go about doing that? To very kind of nuts and bolts sessions that we're all familiar with, like resource training. So if somebody an instruction librarian wanted to teach a particular resource, we would have training so that they could have the knowledge to teach that resource effectively. Initially, and this runs annually, and everyone's really allowed to attend. There's no real formalization to it, although initially it did start kind of as a formalized college in that instructors enrolled in it and kind of went through more of an official program, I suspect, although this is before my time there. But now it's kind of morphed into more of it's just a casual kind of group that everyone's welcome to attend these sessions, and they're usually well received. And it kind of serves two main purposes now. I think the first is that it, before I forget, that its existence is kind of just asserts the value that we place on instruction in the library system, that people, since we have these instruction committees, that at least some people are thinking about how to enhance the instruction skills of people. And then the other part is that it provides an avenue through which instructor librarians can improve their instruction skills by attending these sessions. And just as an FYI, I included the website that you can visit, the Instructor College website. You're welcome to visit it. There was also an article published 2003 or 4 outlining what Instructor College was and that sort of thing. And I didn't include the citation here, but if you want it, feel free to talk to me afterwards or send me an email. I'm happy to share the citation with you. So up until this point, that's all context. So there's a lot of, we have institutional support, I guess, administrative support. We have a lot of committees involved in instruction. There's a lot of people thinking about instruction in an official capacity. But that doesn't always necessarily reach directly to the individual instructors. So we've done a number of specific activities that have helped bring on board individual instructors. And I'll just go through a list here and then transition into Jeff's part of this. So the first thing I think, at least in terms of officially recognizing the importance of assessment in terms of instruction, they being administration, decided to establish an assessment committee. I think this started as a kind of a subcommittee, an assessment subcommittee, I guess is what we would call it. That somehow morphed in the end to a formalized assessment committee. And they were really tasked with, I'm not sure I have another point. No, I don't. But they essentially morphed into they had two main reasons for existing, I guess. One was to collect data to share with administrators, that it was important for us to be able to prove our value, as we've heard throughout the day, to people who are allowing us to teach in their classes and to administration. And the second part was to get people in the habit of assessing and including assessment tools at the end of their sessions. Then the second point, so once this was established, I guess it quickly became apparent that we don't really have any assessment experts within the library system. Not many of our librarians are assessment experts per se. So one of the fortunate things at being in a large institution is that there are experts really in everything. So we were able to partner with the CRLT, the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching, I think is what that stands for. And that group was able to really help us define how we would want to assess and what assessment meant to us. And they broke our assessment down into 3 main categories. We were really interested in determining and assessing the effectiveness of instruction, how effective our instructors were at teaching. And then we also broke it down into student learning, how effective are the students learning what we want them to be learning. And then lastly, there was an administrative perspective, which kind of tied back into getting data that we could share with people that let us do things. And then so all of this isn't necessarily a chronological listing of things, but all of these assessment was kind of, an instruction assessment was percolating throughout our system. So Instructor College decided to identify assessment as a theme for the year of its programming, this summer last year to this year. And with this theme, or to meet this programming, this thematic programming, we invited a couple speakers who had expertise in assessment to talk to us. One was from CRLT, and this was actually a really well received, it was an excellent talk on assessment, instruction assessment. The CRLT person came to spend a lot of time with instruction librarians to figure out what our unique environment was like in terms of teaching, because our librarian type session is usually different from a teaching faculty session who, they have a full course really, and we have one-off sessions oftentimes. And then he was able to tailor a session for us to meet our instructional environment, our typical instructional environment. Then we had also invited a speaker from the Department of Medical Education who was able to give us a talk on more informal assessment activities that you could run in your class, such as just talking to the students beforehand, or noticing that no one has walked out of our sessions, I guess. You could take it, so that would be immediate type of feedback. Then we also had other assessment themed sessions, just brown bags and brainstorming. We developed this evaluation forms, which Jeff will talk about. And then there's also a blog from Instructor College that is, theoretically to help us proliferate information to the instructors in the university. But we've also solicited content from librarians. Jeff was able to write a post on assessment for the blog, and feel free to visit that if you like. And then all of this is to kind of build towards that ideal dream of a culture of assessment where assessment is just taken for granted and everyone's doing it. And it's not like we've reached that state yet, or will ever, but it's something I think we're all striving towards, that we're teaching a lot, and instruction's important, and we need to assess it to get data to really, hit that, connect with the administration who wants to see that value. So at this point, I'm going to toss it over to Jeff, who will promise to make this cohesive.
Glad to hear that. So let's see, how do we move forward with this slide? That one. Okay, great. So to pick up from where Mark left off, I was with the assessment working group, which was tasked with creating, sort of revamping the evaluation forms that we were using at the end of sessions across the library. There had been, prior to this past academic year, a single evaluation form for every session that was taught at the library. And you'll see these are also in the handout. Everything I'm going to show you here is also in the handout. So if you have a hard time seeing it, go ahead and refer to the handout. What the assessment working group came up with was a set actually of 4 different evaluations, each keyed to the kind of instructional situation, the 4 most common sort of instructional situations that we find ourselves teaching in. This, what I've got here as the example, is what we call the intro form, and this is for courses such as freshman English, students who are first or second years, perhaps not as familiar with the library resources and how to use them. The 3 other forms that we formulated were a more advanced form for classes that might be upper division or even graduate courses, a tech form, because we do a lot of instruction with software and strictly sort of not disciplinarily rooted, but software and technical instruction. So we also have a form for that. And then the 4th form we came up with was a consultation form, because we realized that a lot of our selectors, for example, are doing one-on-one consultations, and we thought it would be nice to have something that they could hand over at the end of the session and say, tell me how you thought that went. Now these forms are available both as online versions and in print. So depending on the situation, it makes sense for people to direct their students to the online form or to hand over the print form. All the forms, whether they were online or print, were of course aggregated. We've had a big body of statistics accruing over fall semester 2010. And that was used, as Mark suggested, part of what was motivating all of this was to sort of tell the story of the effectiveness of our instruction to the university at large. And we now have a body of data that we can go in and say, for example, when we teach English 125, we score on average on a scale of 1 to 5, 4.3, I can't even read this, 4.36 on I learned how to use library resources more effectively. In other words, you see, when students come out of our sessions, they tend to feel more confident, right? These numbers are by and large pretty good, I think. So we're pretty proud of that. And again, we had a large body of data that we could sort of divide up in any number of ways and to tell the story of library instruction. Now, this is where the case study comes in. And the case study in this case, I'm going to offer myself as the case study because I hitherto had not been a librarian until last July. July 1st, I suddenly became a librarian. And after many years of teaching in a college context, English courses, freshman writing, I suddenly found myself doing library instruction. And this was a very, very different teaching context for me. And I struggled quite a bit with it, with nailing it down, doing it right, keeping the students engaged, and tailoring the sessions to each instructor's class. You know, as I'm sure most of you know, there's a lot of work that goes into this, and it's not a simple teaching environment. And one of the things that struck me working on these forms is that back in the English department, back in the writing program, at the end of every semester, I would be handed a report. I would be handed all my course evaluations, which we had now individually in the computer. I could go through those, all 293 of them. But I would also be handed a report that sort of analyzed the overall trends. And so I went to the chair of the assessment working group, and I said, would it be possible to create something like this for each instructor at the end of the semester so that I could get a big picture of where I stand in relationship to everybody else who did teaching over the semester? She's a data person, and so she was like, yeah, no problem. So we sat down and worked out this form, and this is admittedly still a draft, but this is in effect what we can give to instructors at the end of each semester. And what it does, I'll just very quickly go through this so that we can get to questions. It goes through each question. It gives my number, the average that I got for every instance of that question, the average that that question got across all forms that were filled out across the library. Then it also gives the theme mean, and Mark touched on these. These are different sort of pedagogical groupings that the questions fell under. And these theme means are actually drawn across all 4 different forms, so different teaching contexts. And we can compare both where the individual question fell in contrast to the pedagogical sort of umbrella concept and where my numbers fell in comparison to that. And then we also got, excuse me, a quick breakdown of the difference where my number was versus the average from across the question and across the theme. Now, for whatever reason, these are reversed. These should not be negative 0.2, but positive, and the other ones should be negative, which doesn't accrue to my glory. But anyway, the other thing that we had here is if you go back to, I won't switch slides on you, but if you go back to the form, you'll see there are 2 open-ended questions. And every form had 2 open-ended questions. And so what Jen did, being a data person, was she had somebody code those questions, right? I, being a humanities person coming in from a humanities teaching context, had never seen anything like this before. I was used to having to sit down with my 30 or 60 or 90, whatever evaluation forms, and reading through those comments, which of course in a semester-long context are much longer, right? There's more of a narrative to be gleaned there. In these one-off sessions, those comments are going to be much shorter. But what they did is they went through and coded these. And so what, can you still hear me? So what we have here are my numbers, and then the average, or rather the aggregate numbers from across all the forms. So, for example, in my evaluations, nothing was not valuable. This is sort of strangely worded coding, and this is still, as I said, a draft and under development. But we're trying to get at what was valuable, what wasn't. I had 99 responses that said nothing was not valuable. That's 64% of my respondents said that, whereas 37% of the average, right? 37% of all respondents said something like that. So what use is this to me as an instructor? Well, what this means is that I can now see where on my evaluation forms where I stand in comparison to the average of all the teaching that went on in the libraries. So I can see, for example, on balance, I'm slightly below average, right? My numbers are slightly lower. Doesn't surprise me a whole lot. This is my first year teaching in this context. And I can also see where, for example, I was somewhat stronger, which was in this particular, somewhat weaker, right? In this particular category, confused about the material, which you may be feeling at this point yourself. And so the idea here is, as we continue forward with this and continue working with Instructor College, we now have this tool, this sort of output that we can give to every instructor at the end of the semester. And we have a number of ideas are floating around both committees where we can go with this next. Do we want to set up, for example, possibly sort of senior teachers who then I can take my form to and say, look, this is suggesting to me that I need to work on certain things. I'm scoring low in these areas. Do you have ideas? Do you have a sort of toolkit of techniques that I might borrow? Would you come and sit in on some of my sessions and keep an eye out for this stuff so that in the future, I can make changes to adapt my teaching to what I'm seeing here. It is admittedly a sort of crude instrument. There's some resistance. How can you capture the fluidity and uniqueness of any given section in this tool? And that, I think, has to be acknowledged. At the same time, it can point us in directions that we might want to investigate further as teachers. Okay? So we have time for questions.
You have two microphones, so both of them have to answer questions.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm sorry if I missed it. Did you say, what system did you use to collect the data? What software? Or
What software was it? It was Qualtrics, I believe. Qualtrics. Qualtrics, yeah. Yeah, Michigan has a contract with Qualtrics. And then what you're seeing here is Microsoft Excel's. Excel gave us the color coding. we didn't choose it.
There was a question.
That was my question too. The system.
Yeah.
Do you plan to maybe report this data, maybe statistically a step further in terms of standard deviation to make those numbers a little bit more meaning?
That would be a question for Jen Green. Since you're talking to the English PhD, I can't answer it. but statistical validity is certainly on the radar, and I think it's something that people are interested in pushing this toward, yeah.
You mentioned that there were 3 other forms, the tech forum, the
Yeah.
division. Is there some way that is there URL?
Yeah, we have, is the next slide, Mark?
Yeah.
Does that direct us to? Yeah, it looks like we didn't include URLs, but they are, actually, if you go to the University of Michigan Library website and type in the search box, assessment, instruction assessment, it will come up. Perhaps more directly if you email us, I'd be happy to, happy to pass those along. Yeah, I should have included them, yeah.
It's pretty easy to see what you might do differently in response to these results, that you might, encourage your students to think and problem solve more independently. What I'm wondering is how you would respond if a different question was the one that was highlighted as an area where you needed to work. Like, for example, the first question, if that was one of the ones that was highlighted
Right.
as an area where you as an instructor needed to work on improving, what would you do with that?
Yeah, I think just myself, I would probably look for some of the assessment tools I could use within the section, right? Just sort of testing them, as we saw from the previous presentation, like how testing them on specifics and that kind of thing. Another part of the answer to that also is that these forms are always under development. As I said, we replaced a single form from last year, and the language and what these questions are getting at was hotly debated, and I would say that debate is not necessarily closed yet either. And as we go on, if we find that like question number 1 is just too broad to really get useful information from, we may revisit it and revise it next year. Yeah.
Did you just share these with the individual instructors, or were the numbers shared with anyone else?
An individual's instructor's report like this is produced anonymously, and only the instructor will see that. You can then do what you want with it, as I have chosen to, right? But yeah, at this point, that's all that. It's as far as these are going. Yeah.
Related then, do you do like a composite report that goes to library administration or so they see how well the instructors are doing as a group?
Yeah, I mean, that was the motivation for the forms in the first place, was to create some sort of report along those lines. I haven't seen it. I've been more sort of wrapped up on this side of things. But I'm sure Jen, the chair of our committee, could tell you exactly what we had done in those terms.
I actually have a question. I'm going to exercise authority here. I was interested, Mark, in the in sort of your training, the workshops and stuff. Are you doing much with peer-to-peer, like the instructors are doing some of these workshops? You talked about talks you had from outside, but what kinds of things are you doing for yourself?
Yeah, we've Instructor College recently is toying around with the idea of having a mentorship program, and I think they started it up particularly in relation to instruction, and this would involve instructors being able to attend other instructor sessions. An instructor would kind of mentor another instructor so they could meet every now and then to discuss instruction-related stuff of interest. So I think we have most of the programming involves large-scale sessions for all instructors, but I think we're also moving towards a more targeted, personalized mentoring program as well.
We have time probably for one more. I saw somebody did.
So you said all the librarians across the whole system used the form. Was there any resistance getting buy-in to that, or was it mandated?
It's not required.
No.
But there was a general request that everybody do this. There are people who don't, or who do so inconsistently, but there's no.
I being one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, there has been some resistance. There are people who doubt the usefulness of it, and that's I think one of the wonderful things coming to a library from an academic, the academic teaching side of things, is that you are allowed to have those doubts and voice them and talk about them. I have been in teaching situations where you lived or died by these numbers, and it's nice simply to have it as a pedagogical tool now.
All right. Well, thank you both. That was.